It was established by Mr. Puneet Bansal in 2015 with a team of 8 professionals. Nitya has grown leaps and bounds over the years. Presently, Nitya has a team of over 50 professionals, including lawyers, chartered accountants, and other specialists operating from 2 offices in New Delhi. Their practice areas include advisory, health checks, litigation support, and compliance support. Nitya has a base of over 200 clients, including many MNCs. Nitya was honored as one of the outstanding Indian law firms in the taxation field in 2017-18 by the prestigious India Business Law Journal. Also, Nitya's managing partner, Mr. Puneet Bansal, was ranked amongst 40 outstanding legal professionals under the age of 40 in the Asia region in the third annual list of Asian Legal Business Magazine. Allow me to welcome Ms. Rena and Ms. Parul. I will be handing over the session to them soon. Once the session is completed, the floor will be open for question and answers for our audience members. And Nitya would also appreciate if, as soon as the session is over, all the participants could, if they could please share their feedback on chat. Nitya would love to hear your thoughts on those. Thank you so much. And I leave the floor open to Nitya.
Thank you, Vishnu. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Wish you all are safe and fine. Now, coming to the topic, today we'll be discussing about GST elements with regard to law and compliances. So we all know that GST just completed its 3 years on 1st July. And if we go back to 30th June 2017, our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, addressed GST as good and simple tax. But is it really good and simple? When we could see in just 3 years, there are 750 plus notifications, 450 plus circulars, 1000 plus advanced rulings, 500 plus High Court, Supreme Court rulings, multiple retrospective amendments, like the ones that turned 3B return equivalent to GSTR3, and then the Tran 1 issues are there. Then there are continuous changes in law. And again, we do face portal issues at the time of compliances. There are numerous portal issues that we face. So with this background, can we really say GST to be a good and simple tax? Now coming to the topic, a tax to be good and simple, we really need to have a clarity about the tax positions that are there under the law. So to have a brief discussion about the same, under the tax positions, we'll be discussing about the levy, time of supply, input tax credit, and then we'll touch upon the documentation that we require to maintain under the GST law, and what all are the compliances. Under compliances, we'll be covering registration, returns, and refunds. Now coming to the first part, which is the levy. So a transaction to be covered under GST must have 4 ingredients. And these 4 elements, if any one of them are absent, then GST cannot be levied, and we can say it is outside the ambit of GST law. So the first element is presence of taxable event. And for GST, the taxable event is supply of goods or services. Second is there should be a person who is liable to pay the tax. That could be either supplier or a recipient. We'll discuss about this. And then there should be a mechanism for calculation of value. And if the mechanism is not there, then again, value cannot be computed and GST cannot be levied. Lastly, there has to be a rate of tax prescribed for computing the tax amount or the value that we calculate under GST laws. So coming to the first leg, taxable event. So a transaction, a taxable event has been defined under GST as a supply of goods and services. And this supply has been defined very broadly. It's an inclusive definition, first of all, and it clearly says that supply includes all forms of supply in the course or furtherance of business. So a transaction to be covered under the GST law, there has to be a supply which includes all forms of supply that covers either your sale, barter, exchange, lease, rental, etc. And it has to be made for a consideration and must be in the course or furtherance of business. So if these elements are there, then we can say it's a supply. The taxable event has occurred. Also, the supply definition includes import of services for a consideration. Now, this import of service can be either in the course of furtherance of business or not in the course of furtherance of business. But if we are importing services for a consideration, then the taxable event has occurred. Interest in a branch office, stock transferred goods to another branch office, then this leg also considered to be a supply under GST, and the levy gets triggered. And GST supply excludes activities that are there specified in Schedule 3. Another classic example of Schedule 3 is when an employee is rendering services to an employer. Then that particular service is kept outside the ambit of GST. So we really need to be mindful enough while having those transactions to see whether it will qualify to be a supply or not. Because if it's not qualifying to be a supply, then GST won't be applicable. Now coming to the second element, which is person liable to pay tax. Generally, the onus of paying tax is on the supplier of goods or services. But when this liability of payment of tax gets shifted to the recipient, then this process is called reverse charge mechanism, that now the recipient of either goods or services is liable for making payment to the government. Under GST, they have specified few services in which the service recipient has been made liable to pay GST. So first is GTA services. So if we are receiving any goods transport agency services and such GTA is not paying tax at the rate of 12%, then this gets covered under reverse charge mechanism, and service recipient is liable to make the payment. Now, in case of legal services, again, this is covered under RCM. If say we are a body corporate or a partnership firm and we receive certain sponsorship services, then in such a scenario, we are liable to pay tax to the government as this is covered under the RCM. If there is import of services, then again, this is covered under RCM. If a director is rendering services to the company, then this transaction is covered under reverse charge mechanism. And this was a debatable issue as people used to take an argument that Schedule 3, which we just talked about, it says that if an employee is rendering services to an employer, then that won't amount to supply. Basis Schedule 3. So director being the employee is not covered under the GST law, and henceforth the RCM or say the GST liability doesn't arise. But recently a circular has been issued which clarified that if the company at the time of making payment of the salary to the director is deducting TDS under section 192 of the Income Tax Act, then this will get covered under the Schedule 3 and it will be considered as a service from an employee to employer and GST won't be applicable. But if the company is deducting TDS under the section 194J of the Income Tax Act, which covers your professional technical fees, then this will get covered under GST and RCM. The liability is under the RCM and company has to pay the tax. Now again, there are few government services. If we are receiving those, then the liability is there under RCM. Some examples could be the renewal fee, tender fee, license fee. If we are paying rentals for an immovable property, then all these services are covered under the reverse charge mechanism. Again, if we are receiving any security personnel services, then such services are covered under RCM. If we are taking a service of renting of motor vehicle and we are a body corporate, then again it is covered under the RCM. Now coming to the third element, which is the value of supply. So the general rule for calculating the valuation is if the supplier and recipient are not related and price is the sole consideration, then transaction value is the value of supply. Now this transaction value basically includes, for example, all the incidental expenses that we have incurred for making that supply. For example, it could be brokerage, commission, then that we have to include in our transaction value. Also, it excludes discount. So if we are supplying goods by announcement or some discounts over those supplies, then those discounts we have to exclude from the transaction value. Important to note that such discounts must be stipulated in an agreement before making such supply or at the time of making such supply, and input tax credit, which is proportionate to the discounted amount, must be reversed by the recipient at his end. So there couldn't be a dual benefit that we are also reducing it from the transaction value, thereby paying lesser GST, and there the recipient has also waived the credit. This cannot be the situation. So we can reduce the discounts by ensuring that they are stipulated in the agreement, and secondly, the recipient has reversed the proportionate credit. Now coming to the last element, which is the rate of tax. So GST has stipulated, they have two notifications which specifies GST rates for goods and services. And for goods, the GST rate ranges from 0.25% to 28%. And in case of services, the GST rate ranges from 1.5% to 28%. So if say these all elements are present in a transaction, then we can say that the levy has occurred, it is covered under the GST, and we have to charge GST. Now the question comes, when does the liability to pay GST arises? So that is covered under the time of supply. So basically time of supply tells about a situation when the taxpayer is liable to pay tax, when the liability arises for those supplies of taxable goods and services. So the general rule in case of goods, it's earlier of either the date of issuance of invoice or date of receipt of payment. And in case of services, it's earlier of date of issuance of invoice or date of provision of service if invoice is not issued within 30 days, or the date of receipt of payment. Important to note that in both the scenarios, you could see if we are receiving the payment in advance, then the liability to pay tax arises. And in this scenario, what all documentation required to be issued, that will cover in the second leg of the webinar. And under RCM, for the services, it's earlier of date of receipt of payment or 61st day from the date of issuance of invoice. So whichever event occurs first, the liability to pay tax arises under GST. For the goods, RCM has not yet started, and so we are not covering it over here. Now coming to the third leg of tax position, which is the input tax credit. So basically, what is the input tax credit? So if I pay some tax on my purchases, then such payment of tax on purchases can be utilized to offset my output tax liability. And this inward purchase tax that I have paid is called my input tax credit. Now under GST, as the promising objective of GST was to allow seamless flow of input tax credits, But this seamless flow comes with few conditions that you have to satisfy few conditions and then you are eligible to avail that credit. से अगर आपने ये कंडीशंस को नहीं सेटिस्फाई किया तो आप उस क्रेडिट को नहीं अवेल कर सकते. एंड व्हाट ऑल आर दोस कंडीशंस दैट विल बी कवरिंग ओवर हियर. सो फर्स्ट कंडीशन is that the recipient should receive those goods and services. If he is not receiving those goods and services, then he is not eligible to avail that credit. And for this receipt of goods and services, he must ensure that it is not falling under the restrictions that are there on availing input tax credit. Basically, अगर मैंने रिसीव किए हैं गुड्स और सर्विसेज और मेरे वो गुड्स और सर्विसेज अगर इनएलिजिबल क्रेडिट्स की लिस्ट में है, तब भी अगर मैं ये सारी कंडीशंस फुलफिल कर रही हूँ, आई विल नॉट बी एलिजिबल टू अवेल सच क्रेडिट्स. So I have to make sure that those are eligible one, not the ineligible one. Now, what are the ineligible credits that we will see? So the first is purchase of motor vehicles having seating capacity less than 13% or renting hiring of motor vehicle with a seating capacity less than 13%. So if we are availing any of these services, then it's an ineligible credit. Howsoever, this restriction won't be applicable if such inward supply is used for making a further supply of such motor vehicle only, or say we are using it for transportation of passengers or imparting training on driving such motor vehicle, and importantly servicing and repair maintenance of motor vehicles service part. So basically the service part is restricted, but the goods part, the credit is allowed. So if say I am receiving any repair and maintenance services relating to these motor vehicles, then credit is allowed on the goods part. The third restriction is on food, beverages, outdoor catering, beauty treatment. This restriction won't be applicable if, again, they are used for making an outward supply of the same category, or it has been mandated on the employer to provide such services to its employee under any law. Then we can avail the credit, else it's restricted. Life and health insurance restriction is there. But if we are satisfying these two conditions, again, we are eligible to claim the credit. If we are using it for making an outward supply of the same category, or if it's obligatory for an employer to provide such services to employee under any law, then we are allowed. Membership of club, health, fitness center is restricted. Gifts, samples, goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, they all are restricted. So there are doubts that our clients also face regarding gifts, that whether 1+1 scheme, which dealers generally provide to the customers, will they get covered under this or not? Like amid COVID-19, during lockdown, industries that were having perishable goods, they have to now, by this time, since no supply has been made, so by this time they have to destroy it. So since the government haven't come up with any of the relaxation in case of these destroy of goods, credit has to be reversed, because it then becomes the ineligible credit. Then goods and services which are used for construction of an immovable property is again restricted and no credit can be availed. If goods and services are used for personal consumption, or personal consumption is something which say we use for satisfying our personal needs, then on such scenarios, no input tax credit will be allowed. Then again, lastly, tax paid if on account of fraud and suppression, then such paid tax won't be available as input tax credit. So at the time of receipt of goods and services, we have to see whether our goods and services are falling under this list or not. If they are falling, then they are ineligible credit and we cannot avail it, and we have to add it to the cost. Now the second condition is possession of a valid document. We must possess a valid document, and for this they have prescribed that if 5 descriptions are there on an invoice, that invoice will be considered as a valid document, and those are it must have GSTN of both supplier and sell recipient, description of goods, total value, tax amount, place of supply in case it's an interstate supplies. The third condition is furnishing return. Now we have to furnish the return in order to be eligible to avail the credit. There is one rule, Rule 36.4, wherein they have specified. So generally what used to happen that people used to avail all the credit, whether reflecting in their GSTR 2A return or not. But now the government has brought up Rule 36.4, wherein it says if a supplier doesn't upload its document to its GSTR 1, then automatically it won't get auto-populated to the GSTR 2A of recipient. So recipient can avail only up to 10% of the ITC on the 10% of the documents that are reflected in its GSTR 2A. And this restriction is applicable on invoices, debit notes that are not uploaded by that are uploaded by the supplier, supplies by registered person under RCM, and it's not applicable on ISD transactions, import of goods, RCM procurements from unregistered suppliers. Due to COVID-19, they have come up with a relaxation that for the month of February 2020 to August 2020, this restriction is not required to be followed on monthly basis, and a cumulative adjustment can be passed in the GSTR 3B of September 2020. Importantly, what we have seen, generally people do a consolidated comparison between the books of accounts in GSTR 2A. Now we generally recommend that we must do the invoice level matching, at that too on monthly basis. Instead of doing a consolidated one, we must do it on monthly basis and invoice level matching. We must identify what are ineligible credits and what are eligible credits, and we must take into account the effect of debit and credit notes. Now at the time of furnishing return, we have to consider all these requirements and compliances. And the fourth requirement is the supplier pays tax to the government. And the fifth condition is if the recipient is not paying to its supplier payment within 180 days, then he is required to reverse the credit. So he must ensure that he pays the vendor its payment within 180 days, else he has to reverse the credit with interest. Now, the last thing that under input tax credit that we'll be covering is the time limit for taking credit. So generally the time limit is GSTR 3B of September month in next financial year of furnishing relevant annual returns. Since annual returns have been deferred, so it's obviously we left with the first option, which is the GSTR 3B of September of next financial year. With this, we come to our second part of documentation. So under documentation, we have to comply with like in tax positions we discussed various legs of supply and everything. So there are many documents that we need to issue on or before or at the time of supply. So first is the tax invoice, which has to be issued when we are making a taxable supply of goods and services. Bill of supply is issued when there is supply of exempted goods. There is one option to issue invoice cum bill of supply. This is issued when there is a supply of both taxable and exempted goods, but made to an unregistered person. Credit note can be issued in scenarios where the taxable value or tax charge is found in excess than the amount actually payable, or if there is a scenarios of sale return. Then debit note can be issued when taxable value or tax charge in short. Now the next one is the receipt voucher. This is to be issued when we are receiving an advance payment. Like in time of supply, we covered that the liability to pay tax occurs when we are receiving the amount. So at that point of a time, we have the option to issue a receipt voucher, or we can issue a tax invoice for that amount. But if we are issuing a receipt voucher, so receipt voucher basically issued in such a scenario. Now refund voucher is issued when we have received an advance payment, but subsequently no supply is made. And payment voucher is issued when we are making a payment under the reverse charge mechanism. Delivery challan has to be issued when we are causing a movement of goods without a tax invoice. then in such a scenarios, we must have a delivery challan with us. Apart from the invoices that we need to issue from time to time, there are some accounts that a taxpayer has to maintain at their principal place of business. So they have to maintain details regarding the production or manufacture of goods, inward outward supply of goods and services, stock of goods, input tax credit availed, output tax payable and paid, details of imported and exported goods, uh, supplies attracting reverse charge, then goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off, details of advances received, paid, adjustment paid thereto. And important to note that all these documents are to be maintained for a period of 72 months from the due date of furnishing of annual return. So these are the documentation that we need to comply with. And we've seen with time people either they are not maintaining the entire documentation or they are just not issuing refund voucher, receipt voucher in those scenarios. So we must be careful about all these compliances that we have to take and the tax positions that we need to take. With this, I request my colleague Raina to take the session forward. Over to you, Raina.
Thank you, Parul. Thank you for giving us the legal taste to GST. Moving on to this form the backbone of any taxation system. In the context of GST, also compliances have assumed significant importance as it involves filing of multiple returns, filing of refund applications, matching of credits, as Parul just explained, Rule 36(4). We need to do annual reconciliations with the books of accounts, and etc. So I'll be covering the 3 R's of compliances, that is registration, returns, and refunds. To begin the journey of GST, a taxpayer or a person first needs to analyze if at all he needs to get himself registered under GST. So for that, there are 2 conditions that every taxpayer should see before getting themselves registered under GST. The first is if the person has the fixed establishment or an office in a state other than the special category states. Also with this condition, if the taxpayer also has an aggregate turnover of more than 20 lakh of rupees, then they are required to get themselves registered under GST. The special category states are the states like Manipur, Mizoram, Sikkim, Assam, etc. As you can see on the screen, the ones highlighted in red. And also if the aggregate turnover of the taxpayer is more than 10 lakh of rupees in these states, then the person is required to get themselves registered under GST. Apart from this, the aggregate turnover, aggregate turnover would include taxable supplies, as in the supply of manufactured goods, supply of traded goods, provision of services. It will also include your exempt supplies, for example, if a person deals in selling of vegetables, etc., or if you've done any exports, or if you've done an interstate supply. But this turnover would exclude the RCM supplies, that is, if you've paid any tax under reverse charge mechanism. The law also has categorized certain taxpayers, certain categories wherein there's a compulsory registration which is required. The first one being if any taxable supply is made interstate. For example, if I am a supplier in the state of UP and I have made a taxable supply in the state of Maharashtra, for example. So if I'm making such supplies, then I will be compulsorily required to take a registration under GST. a casual taxable person or services occasionally in a taxable territory, and he does not have a fixed place of business in that particular state. So, for example, I am a manufacturer of jewelry in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and I go and do certain exhibitions in other states. So for doing those exhibitions and selling my jewelry in those states, I will have to take a separate registration and as a casual taxable person, and I will have to comply with all the compliances that are required to be done for a casual taxable person. Also, if I am discharging my tax under reverse charge mechanism, then also I will be required to take registration compulsorily under GST. Also, compulsory registration is required wherein a taxpayer is supplying goods through an e-commerce operator. By e-commerce operators, we mean a very typical example of this is Amazon and Flipkart. So if you're supplying certain goods through Amazon or Flipkart, etc., then you will be needed to take compulsory a registration under GST, and you'll be required to do all the compliances therein. Further, a non-resident taxable person who's making taxable supplies in India in our taxable territory, then also that person will be compulsorily required to take registration. And input service distributors also will be required to take registration. By input service distributors, we mean that it's a different kind of registration that collates all those all the invoices on which input tax is there on services, and then they distribute this credit, this tax, to various GSTNs. Further, an agent of a principal will also be required to take registration under GST. An agent is a person who supplies goods or services on behalf of somebody, on behalf of a principal. So that person will also be required to take registration under GST. Moving on, the process of GST. So the entire process of this registration is bifurcated into 3 stages. The first one is the application. Now this application per se has 2 parts, part A and part B. In part A, the person who needs to get themselves registered, they need to go on the portal and fill in 3 details. 3 details being your PAN number, your phone number, and your email address. Then the email ID and the phone number will get verified through an OTP, and an ARN will be generated. An ARN is an application reference number. So using that ARN, you can go on the portal and file the application of registration. In the application, basic details will need to be mentioned. Basic details of the proprietor, the director, and certain documents will need to be uploaded, like your address proof or details with details about the director or the proprietor and or the partner, etc. So if you after you submit the application, then it goes through the verification process. The department verifies your application, and this process usually takes about 7 days. After the application is verified, the department will issue will either approve your registration, or they will reject it. So when they reject it, they will also let you know or tell you the discrepancy in the application, in case some additional document is required to be uploaded, or certain information is incorrect or whatever. So they'll like while they'll be rejecting the application, they'll be also telling you why they're rejecting it, and then you can fulfill that discrepancy, and then you can apply for the registration again. Also, if they'll be approving it, then they'll be issuing you a final registration certificate. Moving on, there's a composition scheme under GST. It's a simple scheme for small taxpayers who have a turnover of less than 1.5 crores. But there are a certain category of people who cannot apply for this composition scheme. The first one being a supplier who's making an interstate supply. Like I stated in my previous example, if I am a manufacturer in UP and I have to make certain supplies in Maharashtra, so in this case I will not be able to take composition scheme. Also, a casual taxable person, like I said earlier, and a person who is supplying through an electronic commerce operator also cannot take composition scheme. So after you've done your registration, you will need to decide whether you need to take the composition scheme or you need to go in for a regular scheme. So here I'll just try and differentiate between the two schemes. First is basic, the turnover. So for a regular taxpayer, the turnover needs to be above 1.5 crores. And for a composition, the turnover needs to be below 1.5 crores. Then the GST rate for a regular, it varies from 5% to 28% depending on what goods you're selling, and 18% basically for a service provider. For goods under a composition scheme, the rate that a composition taxpayer needs to pay is just 1%, and it is 0.5% CGST and 0.5% SGST. So all the taxes will go to the state government in which the supplier has registered themselves. For restaurants who are not serving alcohol, the rate is 5%. That is again 2.5% and 2.5%. For any other service provider, the rate is 6%. The documents that a regular taxpayer needs to generate while they are making a taxable supply is a tax invoice, in which they will mention the taxable value, the taxes, and the rate and HSN, etc. So it's an invoice. It's a document wherein quite a few information is required. Whereas a composition dealer will just need to issue a bill of supply, and he will not mention any taxes, etc. on the bill of supply, and he will also not charge that tax from their customers. Coming to input tax credit, in a regular scheme, this input tax credit is allowed. So you can avail the ITC, and then you can pay your tax liability using that credit. And there's no ITC allowed in case of a composition dealer, because as it is, the rate of tax is less. So the government has restricted this availment of ITC in case of a composition dealer. Compliances in a regular scheme, they're obviously higher, and in a composition scheme, there are the compliances, the number of compliances that a person needs to do, like the filing of returns, etc., is lower. Moving on, let's see if you're a regular taxpayer, what all, regular or a composition taxpayer also for that matter, what all returns do you need to file under GST? So the first return is Form GSTR1, wherein you need to fill in all the details of outward supplies, like all your tax invoices, all your credit notes, all your debit notes, detail with respect to HSN, detail with respect to the number of invoices issued, the number of documents issued, the number of delivery challan issued, etc. The due date for this particularly is 11th of succeeding month. Then we have GSTR 3B, wherein the outward supply, as in the outward liability, you need to fill in that outward liability. Also, you need to give in the details of input tax credit and the reverse charge payable. And in this form, in this GSTR 3B, the payment of tax, the payment of set off of liability is also done. So 3B is your return with which you pay your taxes to the government. The due date for this is 20th of succeeding month. For GSTR 4, GSTR 4 is details of output supplies for a composition dealer. This was filed earlier on a quarterly basis. So in a year, you needed to file 4 returns, 4 GSTR 4s. And but recently, this amendment has come wherein they just require you to file just one return yearly, and which is done on the 30th of April of every succeeding financial year. Moving on, GSTR 6 is also a return for an input service distributor, and it is filed on 13th of succeeding month. Input service distributor, I already, like I mentioned, that it is a distributor who collects all the ITC of services and then distributes to various GSTNs. Then there's a return called ITC 04, in which details of goods sent to a job worker need to be filled in by the principal, by the person who is actually sending those goods to the job worker. This is to be filed every 25th of succeeding quarter. So this is also a quarterly return. Then we have GSTR 9 and 9C, which is the annual return. The due date of this is 31st of December of the succeeding financial year. GSTR 9 is wherein all the details of GSTR 1 gets auto-populated, and 9C is wherein you give a reconciliation of your books of accounts with the turnover and the ITC disclosed in the returns that you filed in the past year. So it's basically a consolidation of all those returns, and it has to be certified by a CA. Then we have GSTR 9A. This is the annual return for all the composition dealers. The due date of this is also 31st of December of succeeding financial year. Now these returns are very heavy, and a taxpayer usually does certain mistakes while filing these returns. So I'll basically run through all the common mistakes that a taxpayer usually does. So in case of GSTR 1, in case you have reported tax under different tax heads. For example, I needed to disclose IGST, which is an interstate tax, but instead of that, I disclosed CGST or SGST by mistake. So for this, what I need to do is that I need to identify the correct tax head first, and then I can make a consolidated disclosure in a subsequent return. So for example, I've done this mistake in the month of April, and I can the next return is May month's return. So I can do a consolidated disclosure or a correction in the return for the month of May. Moving on, in case of employee recoveries, so employee recoveries is wherein you recover some amount from your employees and you pay tax to the government on that. So what usually happens is that the taxpayer pays the liability, pays the taxes in GSTR 3B, but they often forget to disclose the same in GSTR 1. So in this, in case you have also missed to do that, then you can raise a consolidated tax invoice, and you can disclose the same in the subsequent returns together. Also, in case of disclosure of credit note or debit notes against multiple invoices. So this is a restriction of the GST portal that the portal does not allow to mention number of multiple invoice numbers or multiple invoice details against which such credit notes or debit notes are issued. So what we suggest is that uploading of such consolidated credit notes should be avoided, and only credit notes or debit notes on one-to-one basis, which have a one-to-one correlation with the tax invoice, should be uploaded. Also, but if you've already uploaded such credit notes or debit notes, then you should prepare an annexure so that in future, while doing an audit, it is easier for you to identify, and it is easier for the auditor also to identify against what all invoices this credit note or debit note was issued. Moving on, so in GSTR 3B, the common mistake that a taxpayer usually does is that they pay excess tax. If your liability was 100 rupees, you by mistake pay, or you by mistake pay 1,000 rupees. So in such cases, the excess tax, that is the 900 excess that you have paid, can be adjusted in the subsequent return. Also, if such adjustment is not possible, for instance, if you do not have any taxable supply in the next month, then a refund claim of that 900 rupees can be claimed. In case you have paid short your liability, then you can add the same in your subsequent return. In case you have discharged your liability under incorrect tax heads, in this case, you can pay your correct liability under correct heads in your subsequent return, and the incorrect tax that you have already deposited or paid can be adjusted in the subsequent return, or you can file a claim of that. In case of output liability reported in the wrong table in form GSTR 1, in such cases, the correct reporting should be done in the subsequent return. If that is not possible, then in the annual return, that is GSTR 9, you can disclose your correct liability. Moving on, now this was with respect to all your outward supplies. Coming to your inward supplies, that is your ITC. So in this case, if you've availed excess ITC, then the same can be, or you can, or if you've availed short ITC, or you've availed ITC under wrong heads, that is IGST instead of CGST and SGST, or vice versa, then you can do a correct reporting in the subsequent return. Also, if or you can, if this is not possible, then you can do an ad hoc reporting in the annual return. That is your GSTR 9. Further, if your value of credit note exceeds the value of outward supply of a current month, then what happens is that you can, the one adjustment that can be done is that it can be adjusted in the subsequent return, or you can claim a refund of this. If this is unadjustable, then you can claim a refund. Now, what practically we suggest clients is, because this refund claim takes time, it can take up to 4 to 5 months. So it is obviously possible. It is obviously suggested that you just adjust that excess value of credit note. Further, you can, while depositing tax in incorrect tax head, while creating a challan, if somebody has created an incorrect challan and paid taxes in the wrong head. So recently the government has come up with the PMT09. It's a form wherein you can transfer your taxes. So if you've paid excess tax in IGST, then you can transfer the same in CGST and SGST. It's an instant form and instant transfer happens in this case. Also, if you've availed excess ITC, then you can do a subsequent an adjustment in the subsequent return, or you can avail or reclaim that ITC, the ITC that you have reversed excess. So during this COVID pandemic, the government also came up with certain relaxations for all the taxpayers. So first, I'll run through all the relaxations that the government gave for taxpayers having more than 5 crore turnover. The first part, so for the month of February, and while you're filing your GSTR 3B and tax payment, so one relaxation that the government came up was they extended the due date and they said that no late fees will be applicable and you will not have to pay any interest also. The second part was that they allowed you to pay 9% interest and no late fees if you're filing your returns. So for GSTR 3B for the month of February, this date was with no interest and late fees was April 4th, and with 9% interest and no late fees was June 24th. For the month of March, this date was May 5th and June 24th again with 9% interest and no late fees. For the month of April, it was June 4th and June 24th for the 9% interest and no late fees. For the month of May, it was June 27th and there was no extension of 9% interest. Also for June 20, the date was July 20th and no 9% interest extension. Why we are highlighting this is, although 24th June is already gone, so if you have still not filed your GSTR 3B, then 18% interest will apply and also late fees will apply from the start. Other returns, the extension for this is for the month of March 2020, the due date is July 10th for GSTR 1. For the month of April, if you've still not filed your GSTR 1, the due date is July 24th. For the month of May, the due date is July 28th. For the month of June, the due date is August 5th. And for 9 and 9C for financial year 18-19, the due date now is 30th of September 2020. For taxpayers having turnover less than 5 CR, the government also came up with relaxations for small taxpayers, as during the COVID, the businesses were not doing very well. So they gave you relaxations to file your returns and pay taxes. So in GSTR 3B for the month of February, with no interest and late fees, the due date was June 30th, 2020. And with 9% interest and no late fees, it's 30th of September. For the month of March, the due date with no interest and late fees is July 5th, and 30th September stays constant for all the periods that we'll be discussing. For April 20, the due date is July 9th. For the month of May, the due date is September 15th. And for the month of June, the due date is September 25th. Also, a very important window that they've opened for taxpayers who have not filed their returns for the period July 2017, that is since inception of GST, till January 2020. So they can file their 3B and GSTR1 without any late fees. Yes, you will, if there's a tax liability, then you would have to pay interest on that. Moving on to other returns, for taxpayers having turnover less than 5 CR, the other returns as in GSTR1 for the month of March can be filed on till July 10th. For the month of April, it can be filed till July 24th. For the month of May, it can be filed till July 28th. For the month of June, it can be filed till August 5th. And in case you've opted for a quarterly return, then for taxpayers having a quarterly return of January to March 2020, they can file the returns up till July 17th. And for the quarter April to June, the due date is August 3rd. Moving on to the third R, which is the refunds. So a taxpayer can claim refund there are 3 types of refunds. So I'll be quickly going through all the types of refunds that a taxpayer can claim. An output stage refund has also parts. So output stage refund is where you pay your taxes and then you claim your refund. So in the first case, if you've made a 0 rated supply, that is if you've made an export and you've paid IGST on it, if you've paid your taxes on it, then you can claim a refund of that. If you've made deemed exports, then you can claim a refund of that. Deemed export is supplied to SEZ, etc. Or if you have paid taxes under wrong heads, then also you can claim refund of that tax, that excess tax. In case of inputs, then the second type of refund is an input stage refund, that is refund of accumulated ITC. In this case, if you've done 0 rated supplies, that is if you've made exports and you've purchased certain goods or services and the ITC is accumulated. The accumulation mostly happens because you're not paying taxes on exports. You're making the exports under a letter of undertaking, an LUT. So in this case, you need to get the refund of the accumulated ITC. So in case of 0 rated supplies, this refund can be filed for, and in case of inverted duty structure, this refund can be filed for. By inverted duty structure, we mean that the rate of outward liability is less than the rate of the taxes paid on imports. Others, in case other refunds are excess payment of tax. And if you've paid excess payment, then you can claim refund of that on account of any assessment or appeal or any other order. Then also you can claim refund of that. And also in any other case, this refund can be filed for. Moving on, a refund claim has to be filed within 2 years from the relevant date. The example of a relevant date is example for if you're exporting goods by sea or air, the date on which such ship or your aircraft leaves India. So the period of 2 years needs to be seen from that particular 2 years, from that particular date. In case of export of services, when you're receiving payment in foreign exchange, or the date of issuance of invoice. So the 2 years need to be calculated from that date. In case of an inverted duty structure, the due date for furnishing return for the period in which refund is claimed. And in any other case, the date of payment of tax, from that date, you need to calculate your relevant date, that is the period of 2 years. Further, moving on, the process of filing of a refund claim is that you file an RFD 01 while you're filing the refund application, there are certain documents that you need to upload with the application. That is your GSTR 2A. There are certain undertakings that need to be uploaded. After you file the refund application, there is a generation of an ARN. An ARN is again an application reference number. So this ARN is generated. So if you're so there can be two parts now to this after the generation of ARN. So the department needs to issue you an acknowledgement in the form RFD02, or they can issue you a deficiency memo in RFD03. So this issuance of acknowledgement or a deficiency memo needs to be done within 15 days. Now this deficiency memo, in case a deficiency memo is issued, then a fresh application would need to be filed. In case the department issues you an acknowledgement, then they will give you a provisional order within 7 days, and after that they will give you a final order, and then they will disburse your refund within a period of 60 days. Moving on, so for because of this COVID pandemic, these refund applications also got delayed, and people were not able to file these applications. So the government came up with extensions with respect to these refund applications also. So if your last date of filing of application was falling between March 20th, 2020 to August 30th, then you can still file your application by August 31st, 2020. Moving on. So there were certain circulars also that the government issued, wherein they clarified certain points that the taxpayers were confused about, with respect to refunds. The first one was that across financial years, you can club one refund application, one claim, and you can file one application for multiple periods, as in if you were filing your application monthly or quarterly, then you can just club that claim and file once and for all. In case of ITC, in case of refund of ITC, you need to do a two-way reconciliation, which is you can claim refund of only those invoices which are reflecting in your GSTR 2A. Also, there was another clarification that in case of inverted tax refund, if your GST rate is reduced, then you cannot file a refund under inverted duty structure in this case. Also in the refund application, they mandatorily required you to give your HSN details. So, in case of ITC, so most taxpayers did not have this detail of HSN. Because a taxpayer usually maintains their HSN details for outward supplies, but they usually do not track their, the HSN for your inward supplies. So for this, it is suggested that, you align your ERP accordingly to map this HSN and SAC for your inward supplies as well. Also, if your refund is granted, then it will be recredited to the original source of payment. So if while filing the application, your refund is debited from your electronic cash ledger or your electronic credit ledger, then when you get the refund, it will be credited back to that particular source of payment. With this, we finish the webinar, and we thank you all for joining in, and thank you all for your patience. Also, we'll just go through all the questions that you all have asked, and we'll be answering them one by one.
Parul, Rena, I have already shared the questions that we have received with you. Can we start addressing those, please? Also, I would really request if everyone can please share their feedback for this session today so far on the chat box. I think Nitya would really like to read whatever feedback everyone has for them. Thank you so much for joining us. Please give us some time um, for the question and answer round to begin. Thank you.
Okay, so the first question is asked by Ria Goyal, and she asks us that does a lawyer's services come under GST? So no, Ria, the lawyer's services doesn't come under GST, as in you don't need to pay GST on a lawyer's services, whereas a person taking your services will need to pay taxes under reverse charge mechanism, because a lawyer's services is covered under the RCM list that Parul discussed. So you don't need to get yourself registered under GST to pay taxes per se. But yeah, you can get yourself registered if you but you don't need to pay taxes. You can still get yourself registered, and while you'll be filing your return, your GSTR1, there's an option which says which asks you if your services fall under reverse charge. So for that, you need to just click on yes, and then you can file your return. But you don't need to pay taxes on your outward supplies. So I hope I've cleared that. The next question. The next question is if the aggregate turnover is rupees 20 lakh, is it the same for both in case of goods and services? Yes, it's the same for goods and services.
One more question is there, that Rule 86A of the Act deals with detecting fake invoices filed by suppliers, but in certain cases, officers can also block the credit of the buyers in case they fail to ensure that the supplier haven't paid their taxes according to the invoices. Does the Act provide any remedy for such a buyer? And if not, how they're supposed to ensure that the suppliers have paid the taxes? So yeah, the act doesn't provide for any remedy, and there are people have challenged this section 16 condition, which requires a recipient to track that supplier has paid the tax, because it's really impossible for a recipient to ensure whether the supplier has paid the tax or not. But practically speaking, if say we have seen practically that they are freezing the bank accounts and they issue notices which are actually without any basis. They do not have a proper basis for freezing those accounts. So the best we can do in this scenario is we can just simply keep a follow-up communication with our suppliers and ensure that they pay the tax and they file their returns, especially the GSTR 3B returns. So this way we can ensure it. But yes, there is no remedy so far.
There's another question which says who can file correct GST registration, GST filing and return of GST? If any individual files GST and makes a default or mistake while filing it, what is the procedure to clear that mistake? So I have already covered most of the mistakes that a taxpayer does while filing the returns. So I mean, if you have a specific mistake that has happened, then you can write to us. But I believe we've covered most of the mistakes and we've suggested the possible solution for that also.
So there are no more questions. We thank you all for joining us for this webinar and hope to see you soon again. Yeah. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Parul. Thank you so much, Anna, for your time today. This has been an
Thank
extremely enriching
you.
experience for all of us. We've been getting some really, really nice feedbacks as well. I'll share those with you shortly. I also, yeah. So thanks a lot. And I also thank Lawyer for conducting this session. And thanks a lot to all the participants for joining us. If there are any more questions, you can please write to Nitya and ask those questions directly. And both Parul and Rena will be happy to answer. Thanks a lot. Have a great weekend, you all.